The scent of white lilies was suffocating, a sweet, cloying perfume of death that clung to the heavy air in the church. Imani stood in the back, a ghost in a simple black dress, her presence a deliberate, quiet rebellion. She kept her eyes on the polished casket at the front, on the mountain of flowers that threatened to consume it. She would not look at him. Not yet. She was here for his mother, the only member of the Kwan family who had ever shown her a moment of genuine kindness. A woman who would sneak her sweet rice cakes and tell her stories of a younger, softer Jeong, a boy who existed long before the man he became. The organ music was a low, mournful drone, a sound that vibrated through the stone floor and up into Imani's bones. The pews were filled with men in dark, impeccably tailored suits and women whose grief was as artfully applied as their makeup. Every single one of them was aware of her. She could feel their collective gaze, a physical weight on her shoulders. The ex-wife, the outsider, the American woman who had somehow breached their fortress and then been unceremoniously ejected from it. She had told herself she would not stay long, pay her respects, offer a silent prayer for a woman she had genuinely cared for, and then disappear back into the life she had painstakingly rebuilt. A life of quiet studios, the smell of turpentine and old canvas, a life where the only debts were to galleries and the only threats were deadlines. But the sight of him, standing rigid and untouchable by the front pew, held her captive. Kwon Ji-young was not a man who mourned. He was a man who conquered grief, beat it into submission, and wore it like another layer of armor. His Tom Ford suit was a severe black, sharp enough to cut, his posture an exercise in absolute control. From this distance, she could not see his eyes, but she knew them. She knew the cold, dark obsidian that saw everything as a transaction, a weakness, or a target. Even in this holy place, surrounded by symbols of mercy and forgiveness, he was a predator at rest. His stillness was more menacing than any movement. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane he had created. That was the moment he turned. It was not a glance, but a deliberate, sweeping survey of his territory. His eyes scanned the rows of loyal soldiers and treacherous allies, and then they found her. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The air grew thick and heavy, the temperature in the room seeming to drop by several degrees. Then, a subtle shift in his shoulders, an infinitesimal tightening of his jaw. He had seen her. The truce she had imagined, a temporary ceasefire for the sake of his mother, was not going to be honored. He moved like the room owed him space. People parted for him without a conscious thought, a silent, instinctual deference to the power that radiated from him. He did not rush. His steps were measured, deliberate, each one a hammer blow against the fragile peace Imani had constructed around herself. He stopped a foot in front of her, close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of bergamot and cedar that always clung to him, a scent that was tied to so many memories she had tried to burn. "What are you doing here?" His voice was a low whisper, a blade meant only for her. It was not a question. It was an accusation. Imani lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I came to pay my respects to your mother. Your respects are not welcome." The words were clipped, precise, each one a perfectly formed piece of ice. "She is not your family. Not anymore." A flicker of heat went through her. "She was my friend. She was kind to me when no one else in your world was, including you." "This is not a debate," he said, his eyes narrowing. "This is a command. You will leave my mother's funeral. Now." The sheer audacity of it, the colossal disrespect, stole her breath. He was making a scene, turning this solemn rite into another demonstration of his power, his control. All for an audience of men who feared him. He was desecrating his own mother's memory to settle a score with his ex-wife. The grief she felt for the kind old woman in the casket curdled into a cold, sharp anger. "No," she said, her voice as quiet and firm as his. "I will not. This day is for her. It is not for you. It is not for your pride." He took another step, invading the last of her personal space. His shadow fell over her. "You misunderstand your position, Imani. You have no position. You are a ghost. And I am ordering you to vanish." He reached out, his fingers wrapping around her upper arm, his grip a steel band of possession. It was not brutal, but it was absolute. It was the hold of a man who is used to his orders being obeyed without question. That was when she made the mistake of looking past him, at the casket, at the serene face of his mother in the open casket photograph, a woman who deserved reverence and peace. And in that moment, something inside Imani snapped. The careful composure, the years of building walls to keep him and his world out, it all crumbled into dust. Her hand moved in a blur. The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek was a shocking crack in the funereal silence. It was not a slap of fury, but of sharp, clarifying outrage. It echoed off the vaulted ceilings, a single, sharp report that was louder than any gunshot. The grip on her arm vanished. Every head in the church swiveled towards them. Ji-young's men, positioned like statues throughout the church, tensed, their hands twitching toward the weapons concealed beneath their jackets. But they did not move. They waited for the order. Ji-young did not flinch. He did not even blink. He simply stood there, his head still slightly turned from the impact. A faint red mark began to bloom on his carved cheekbone. The silence stretched, becoming a living thing, suffocating and vast. Imani's hand tingled, the phantom sensation of the blow still electric on her skin. She did not lower her gaze. She held his, her own eyes burning with a righteous fire. "Have you no shame?" she whispered, her voice carrying in the dead quiet. "This is your mother, the woman who gave you life, who loved you when you were nothing. And you stand here, in God's house, on the day of her burial, and you turn it into a vulgar display of your own ego." She took a half step forward, closing the distance he had created.
"She deserves more than this.
She deserves your grief.
She deserves your respect.
She deserves a son who remembers how to be a human being for one single day. So you will stand here, you will mourn your mother, and you will leave me alone." She held his gaze for one more defiant second, then deliberately turned her back on him. She walked away from the stunned silence of the crowd, away from the frozen tableau of his shock, and took a seat in an empty pew near the back. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, and fixed her eyes on the altar. She did not look back. She could feel his stare on her like a physical burn, but she did not give him the satisfaction. The organist, after a moment of paralyzed hesitation, began to play again. The service resumed, but everything had changed. The air was charged, the power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Imani had challenged the king in his own court, and for now, impossibly, she had won. The service ended. A slow, somber procession of black-clad figures filed past the casket, their quiet condolences a murmur beneath the final hymn. Imani remained in her seat, a solitary island in the emptying church. She waited until the last of the family members had departed, until only she and Ji-young's men remained. They stood by the exits, not blocking her way, but making it clear she was not free to go. They were waiting for him. He appeared from a side chamber. The conversation with the priest concluded. He walked down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He stopped at her pew, but did not speak. He simply waited. Finally, Imani rose. She faced him, the anger of their earlier confrontation replaced by a profound weariness. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ji-young. Truly. She was a good woman." He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The red mark on his cheek had faded to a dull stain against his pale skin. "You will come with me again, not a request." "I'm not going anywhere with you," she said. "I paid my respects. I'm leaving." "That is no longer an option," he replied, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You made a public spectacle. You challenged me in front of my men and my enemies. There are consequences for that. The only spectacle was you, treating your mother's funeral like a business negotiation," she shot back. Nevertheless, he gestured toward the grand oak doors. "You will walk out of this church and get into my car. You will do it quietly. If you do not, these men will ensure you do. Their methods will be less pleasant. The choice is yours." She looked at the men by the door. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes held a chilling certainty. They would obey him without hesitation. She knew she had no real choice. She had slapped a lion, and now he was showing her the bars of the cage. With a sigh that felt like it came from the depths of her soul, she walked past him toward the doors, the scent of cedar and his cold, absolute power following her every step of the way. The ride was silent. The city of Seoul blurred past the tinted windows of the Maybach, a vibrant, living world that felt a million miles away from the sterile, cold interior of the car. Ji-young sat opposite her, not beside her, creating a formal distance between them. He stared out his own window, his profile as sharp and unforgiving as broken glass. Imani focused on her own breathing, on keeping the tremor from her hands. She told herself it was survival instinct. It was a lie she was beginning to find less and less convincing. They arrived at his penthouse, a monument of glass and steel that pierced the sky over the Han River. The private elevator opened directly into the living space, a vast, minimalist expanse of white marble, black leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the glittering city like a captured jewel. It was a space designed to intimidate, to remind any visitor of the sheer scale of his power. It had never felt like a home, not even when she had lived here. It was a beautiful, empty fortress. He walked to the bar, a long slab of black granite, and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He set one down on the marble coffee table in front of her. She did not touch it. "Why did you really come today, Imani?" he asked, his back still to her as he stared out at the city. "I already told you. For your mother." He turned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass.
No.
"You could have sent flowers. A card. You came for me. You came to see if I would break." "You give yourself too much credit," she said, her voice cool. "The world does not revolve around you, Ji-young. Not even on a day like today." A muscle worked in his jaw. "My mother did not die of old age." The statement hung in the air between them, cold and heavy. Imani's breath caught. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw past the anger. She saw a hairline fracture in the perfect, cold facade. It was grief, but it was something else, too. A raw, burning rage. "What happened?" she asked, her own anger dissolving into a cold dread. "It was the Parks," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl. "A message. They used a poison, slow-acting, designed to mimic heart failure. Untraceable, unless you know what to look for. My father's rivals still want their pound of flesh, and they decided to take it from the one person I could not shield."
His wound was laid bare.
Not just the loss of his mother, but the shame, the failure. In his world, failure to protect your own was the ultimate sin. It was a vulnerability that could be exploited, a debt of blood that had to be repaid. The woman he had failed to protect was his mother, and the shame of it was eating him alive. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Your sorrow is useless to me," he said, dismissing her sympathy with a wave of his hand. "Your presence at the funeral, however, is not. You made yourself a target today. By showing up, by making a scene, you announced to everyone watching that you still matter to me. The Parks will see you as leverage, a weakness they can use." The cold dread in Imani's stomach solidified into a block of ice. "So, this is why you brought me here? To protect me?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "I brought you here because I cannot afford to have you captured. Your life is now a strategic asset. My asset. You are not leaving this building until I have dealt with the Park family."
Permanently.
She stared at him, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She was a prisoner. She had walked into that church to mourn a friend, and had walked out a captive, chained to him once again by the violence that defined his life. She could have run. After she slapped him, she could have walked out of that church and disappeared into the city. But she hadn't. She had stayed. She had sat in that pew and defied him, and in doing so, had made a deliberate choice. She had chosen to re-enter the war. She just hadn't realized it until now. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun over the sprawling cityscape. Imani was a prisoner in a gilded cage, with a view that stretched to the mountains. Ji-young's men were ghosts, silent and watchful, their presence a constant reminder of her confinement. Ji-young himself was a phantom, disappearing for long stretches, returning in the dead of night with the scent of cold air and something metallic and sharp clinging to his clothes. He never spoke of where he went or what he did. He did not have to. The violence was a palpable thing in the air between them, an unspoken third occupant in the sterile penthouse. Imani spent her time trying to find a crack in the fortress. She had her laptop, her phone. She reached out to her contacts in the art world, feigning a sudden research interest in the private collections of Seoul's elite. She started with the Park family. It was a long shot, a desperate attempt to feel useful, to do something other than wait for Ji-young's war to reach its bloody conclusion. One evening, he found her hunched over her laptop at the massive dining table, charts and auction records spread across the polished surface. He stood behind her, his presence so quiet she did not notice him until his shadow fell over the screen. "What is this?" he asked. "Work," she said, not looking up. "Something I still have, beyond these walls." He was silent for a long moment. She felt his gaze on her, intense and analytical. "You're looking for something specific." It was not a question. She finally turned to face him. He was closer than she'd expected. The faint scent of bergamot was there, but underneath it was the smell of rain and exhaustion. There were new, fine lines around his eyes. The war was costing him. "Park Min-jun," she said, tapping a name on the screen. "The head of the family. His wife is a collector. She specializes in Joseon-era porcelain. Specifically, pieces that went missing during the Japanese occupation. Most are considered lost forever. Illegally excavated. Unsellable on the open market." Ji-young's eyes narrowed. He leaned closer, his hand resting on the back of her chair. The warmth of his body was a startling intrusion. And 3 months ago, a piece matching the description of the famed moon glow vase was acquired by a private buyer through a shell corporation in Macau. The seller was an antiquities dealer known for moving stolen art. "I'm tracing the money. It's a faint trail, but it might lead somewhere." She was doing more than tracing money. She was using her knowledge, her world, as a weapon in his. She was crossing a line. He said nothing. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the low hum of the city below and the unspoken history that lay between them like a minefield. That is when she made the mistake of looking up directly into his eyes. In their dark depths, she saw something other than control and calculation. It was a flicker of surprise, of grudging respect. It was the first time he had looked at her not as a problem to be managed, but as an asset, an equal. The charged moment stretched, thin and fragile. "Be careful, Imani," he said, his voice a low murmur, so close she felt the vibration of it. "The paths you are walking lead to dark places." "I'm already in a dark place, Ji-young," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm just trying to find a light switch." He straightened up, the moment broken. But something had shifted. He had seen her as more than just his ex-wife, more than just a liability. He had seen her as a player in his game. And in his world, that was a dangerous, and perhaps fatal, form of intimacy. The attack came, without warning. It was not the brutal, overt assault she might have expected, but something far more insidious. A call came from her gallery contact, a frantic man named Mr. Choi. One of her restoration projects, a priceless 18th-century scroll, had been damaged, vandalized. But it was the nature of the damage that turned Imani's blood to ice. A single character had been burned into the delicate silk, the Hanja symbol for Park. It was a message, delivered not with bullets, but with the desecration of beauty. It was aimed directly at her. Ji-young saw the photograph Choi sent her over her shoulder. His entire body went rigid, a predator sighting its prey. The cold fury that had been simmering beneath the surface since his mother's death erupted into a glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any shouting rage. "They know you are helping me," he stated, his voice dangerously soft. "They are telling me they can touch you. That anything you care about, I cannot protect. This was it. The escalation. The enemy had made a move that directly targeted her, using the language of her world against her. This was no longer just his war. They had dragged her onto the battlefield. What do we do? She asked, the words catching in her throat. There is only one thing to do, he said, turning to face her. His eyes were black ice. We end this. Tonight. His plan was surgical and brutal. He had located Park Min-jun's safe house, a private villa nestled in the hills outside the city, where he kept his most prized possessions, including, Ji-young's intelligence suggested, his wife. Using Imani's research, they knew Park was meeting the Macau dealer there that night to acquire another piece. Ji-young's men would secure the perimeter. He would go in alone. No, Imani said, the word sharp and absolute. You won't. He turned on her, a flash of irritation in his eyes. This is not your concern. You made it my concern when you locked me in this apartment. You made it my concern when the Parks burned my work. I know that dealer. His name is Wei. He's arrogant, greedy, and he has a weakness for praise. Your men go in with guns. He'll clam up or get himself killed. Let me talk to him first. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's more dangerous to go in blind, she argued, stepping into his path. Ji-young, you operate with a hammer. Everything is a nail. This requires a scalpel. Let me be your scalpel. He stared at her, a war raging behind his eyes. The instinct to protect, to control, fought against the cold, tactical mind that recognized the truth in her words. She was offering him a better way, a smarter way. She was offering him a weapon he did not possess. The moment stretched, the tension in the room so thick she could taste it. He was seeing her, truly seeing her, not as the woman he'd married and lost, but as the woman standing before him now, calm, intelligent, and fierce. You will wear an earpiece, he said finally, the words a concession that felt like a tectonic shift. You will have 2 of my best men with you, disguised as your security. The moment I say the word, you get out.
No arguments.
Those are my terms. She nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was her choice. The moment she crossed the line she could never uncross. In the breathless silence before they left, as he fitted the tiny earpiece into her ear, his fingers brushed against her skin. The contact was brief, professional, but it sent a jolt through her. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. I told myself keeping you here was for your own protection, he said, his breath warm against her ear. I was lying to myself. It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more dangerous. It was a confession, an admission that his control was a facade, that his motives were tangled up in something he could not name. And in that moment, she had to make her own admission, if only to herself. She had told herself she stayed because she had no choice. She was lying too. The villa was a fortress of modern architecture and traditional gardens, a serene mask for the violence it housed. Imani walked through the gates, flanked by 2 of Ji-young's most formidable men, their bespoke suits doing little to hide their lethal purpose. She was playing a part, a wealthy, discerning art consultant. A role she knew well, but tonight it felt like a costume made of glass. Through the earpiece, Ji-young's voice was a calm, steady presence in her head. He is in the main gallery. Wei is with him. Stay on the path. She found Park Min-jun and the dealer admiring a collection of porcelain displayed in climate-controlled cases. Park was an older man with the soft hands of a scholar and the dead eyes of a snake. Mr. Wei, Imani said, her voice smooth and confident. A pleasure to see you again. I wasn't aware you were in Seoul. Wei, a preening man in a silk shirt, turned, his surprise quickly masked by a greedy smile. He knew her reputation. Her presence gave him legitimacy. This was the opening she needed. She moved through the conversation like a dancer, praising the collection, questioning the provenance of the new piece, planting seeds of doubt in Park's mind about Wei's honesty. She used her knowledge not as a shield, but as a weapon, carefully dismantling the trust between the 2 men. The glaze, she murmured, peering at the vase Wei had brought. It's exquisite, but the craquelure near the base seems inconsistent with late Josian firing techniques. It's almost too perfect. Park's eyes narrowed. He looked from the vase away. The first crack had appeared. Through the earpiece, Ji-young's voice was a low hum. He's taking the bait. Keep going. She acted decisively. With a confidence she did not feel, she pulled a small, high-intensity UV light from her purse. If you'll permit me? She asked Park not way. She was appealing to the collector's pride, his expertise. Before either could object, she shone the light on the vase. A faint, almost invisible hairline fracture glowed under the UV, evidence of a modern repair. The vase was a masterful forgery. Wei turned pale. Park's face became a mask of cold fury. He had been cheated, humiliated. In his world, that was a fatal insult. He turned on Wei, his voice a venomous hiss. In that moment of distraction, Ji-young's voice came through her ear. Now, Imani, get out.
Now.
She did not hesitate. As Park's men seized the terrified dealer, her own security stepped forward, shielding her and escorting her back toward the entrance. Behind her, the serene gallery erupted into chaos. She did not look back. She had lit the fuse. Ji-young would handle the explosion. She was never rescued passively. She had created the opening that he would now exploit with brutal efficiency. Back in the penthouse, the adrenaline slowly leached away, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion. Imani stood by the window, watching the first blush of dawn paint the sky. She had walked into the heart of the enemy's camp and emerged unscathed. She had used her mind, her skills, and in doing so, had saved Ji-young from walking into a trap and likely saved her own life. He entered the room, moving with a silent grace that belied the violence of the preceding hours. There was no blood on him, no sign of the fight, but it was there in his eyes. He stopped beside her, and they stood in silence, watching the city wake up. It's over, he said. It was not a boast.
It was a simple statement of fact.
Park Min-jun's organization had been decapitated. His power was broken. Is it ever really over? She asked, her voice quiet. No, he admitted. There will always be another. This was the truth of his world, a truth she had run from once before. Now, she was standing in the center of it, not as a victim, but as a participant. A cost had been paid. Her name was now linked to his in the underworld. Her quiet life was gone, perhaps forever. The gallery, her work, it was all tainted by what she had done. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You are free to go, Imani. I will have my men escort you to the airport. I can set you up with a new life, anywhere you want. A new name. You will be safe. He was offering her an escape, the out she had once desperately wanted. But listening to him now, all she could hear was the vast, empty silence that would follow if she left. The silence of a life without this intensity, this danger, this man. And what if I don't want to go? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. She was making the choice, consciously, with her eyes wide open. His gaze locked on hers. He took a step closer, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his eyes, no strategy. There was only a raw, unguarded vulnerability, an acknowledgement of what she was to him, no longer deniable, no longer hidden. He reached out, not to grab or to command, but to gently cup her face in his hand. His thumb stroked her cheek, right where she had once struck him. It was the most tender gesture she had ever received from him. Then stay, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not name. He did not promise her love. He did not promise her peace. He promised her nothing but the dangerous, violent truth of his life. He leaned in, and his lips met hers. It was not a kiss of passion, but of recognition. A quiet, searing claim that sealed the choice she had just made. A silent acknowledgement that they were two halves of the same brutal, beautiful, and dangerous whole. The sun rose over Seoul, casting long shadows across the floor, and for the first time in a long time, the fortress felt less like a cage and more like a kingdom. Their kingdom. And as he pulled back, he looked at her, truly looked at her, and he said her name. Imani. The way he said it was different than anyone else ever had. It was not a name. It was an oath.